Hello and welcome to the Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Ligato, and today we're going to be reviewing, analyzing, and critiquing an article in the Wall Street Journal. And this is a Wall Street Journal news exclusive, apparently. And this article is on the U.S. is going to allow South Korean and Taiwan chip makers to keep operations in China. So, as you probably know, the United States has been trying to punish China by not allowing chip operations in China. And the primary chip makers are places like South Korea and places like Taiwan. And so if you're trying to punish a country like China, then the countries you absolutely need to get on board with those trade sanctions are places like Taiwan and South Korea. And it looks like the United States has lost so much political capital, persuasiveness, whatever you want to call it, that the trade sanctions that the United States tried to implement have been completely nullified. And we're going to read about that now. So analysts say the move will weaken export control measures aimed at curbing China. I mean, no duh. If the two biggest chip-making countries are still allowed to work with China, then your export control measures, your trade sanctions, are not going to be particularly successful. I mean, that seems pretty self-explanatory, right? The Biden administration plans to allow top semiconductor manufacturers from South Korea and Taiwan to maintain and expand their existing chip-making operations in China without U.S. reprisals, according to recent remarks by a senior Commerce Department official. This is embarrassing. This is absolutely embarrassing. I mean, why even do trade sanctions at that point if they're not going to do absolutely anything? Just a complete shocker. Whoops. A complete shocker at how America has lost influence. Some analysts say the move will weaken U.S. export controls designed to slow China's technological advance. I mean, no duh. You might as well just not have it at that point because you're just embarrassing yourself. Alan Estevez, and I feel like it's going to be a running theme on this show that I cannot pronounce people's names at all. Estevez. Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security told an industry gathering last week that administration intended to extend existing exemptions from U.S. export control policy designed to restrict companies from selling chips and chip-making equipment to China, according to several attendees. Last October, the U.S. implemented curbs on China's semiconductor sector, but it also provided one-year exemptions to several companies, including South Korea's Samsung Electronics and Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing that have invested billions of dollars to build plants in China. Those exemptions were set to expire in October. Estevez told a meeting of the Semiconductor Industry Association, a trade group, that the exemptions would be renewed for the foreseeable future, according to attendees. Commerce Department declined to comment. I mean, why would you comment at that point? It's such an embarrassment. Like I said earlier, why even have trade sanctions if the two biggest countries you needed to get on board neither are on board, and you capitulate to their demands to not be on board? I mean, don't get me wrong. I completely agree with South Korea and Taiwan in this instance about continuing to work with China, but like, if you knew that was going to be the case, if you knew that you didn't have the political capital to persuade South Korea and Taiwan, then why even do this? So really, it's just the United States that is embarrassed right now and is humiliated, really. The status of the exemptions was closely scrutinized by companies and foreign governments to see how strictly the U.S. export curbs would affect investments in China beyond this fall. The move to extend exemptions rather than winding them down amounts to a recognition by U.S. authorities that efforts to isolate China from high-tech goods are more difficult than anticipated in a highly integrated global industry, according to industry executives. So I was reading about this, and people think a decoupling between the United States and China would either hurt China more or hurt China and the United States equally. And I have bad news for you, people propagandized by the West, because United States is like, if you're comparing it to places like other Southeast Asian, East Asian nations and the European Union and stuff like that, I mean, I think United States is like fourth or fifth in terms of which group of countries, which region of the world China actually gets a lot of its influence and money from. The United States is not up there in terms of the actual trade interactions with China. And so decoupling from China will hurt the United States far, 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 far more than it'll hurt China. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And these other countries are like, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to hurt my own country in order to help America here. It also comes as some foreign businesses bristle at Washington's expanding interference in their operations. So if this was 30 years ago, these companies would have kept completely silent. You're just seeing the absolute waning of American influence. And the thing is, because everyone realizes that this is a iterative game where you have to work with people in the future, if these businesses thought this was just a slight decline in America and that they would be strong again, they wouldn't be spurning America to this extent. So the fact that various organizations, businesses, and governments throughout the world are saying, yeah, I don't care what you have to say, America, that is telling you that not only is America currently weak, but these various organizations expect America to be weak for the foreseeable future. They don't expect America to come back to retaliate in the future after they become stronger, because they don't expect America to become stronger again. The U.S. has sought to keep advanced chips out of Chinese hands by limiting the export of chips and related chip-making equipment, not only by American manufacturers, but also those made by allies. So again, a very colonialist mindset of, well, we're not going to trade with China, and we're going to force our supposed allies to not trade with China either. And look how that's going. South Korea and Taiwan obviously not agreeing to this, which makes complete sense. I mean, America has been able to dictate things to places like Germany and Japan that are, how do I want to put this? They're not beneficial to places like Germany and Japan. And it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense to me that these countries agree to American demands. But then you see places like South Korea and Taiwan that are doing things in the best interest of their people in this instance, and they're not agreeing to American demands that are detrimental to their specific countries, or in Taiwan's case, the province of Taiwan. The U.S. has influence over Korean and Taiwanese chip makers because the companies rely on technology and equipment developed or manufactured by companies from the U.S. as well as from the Netherlands and Japan. I mean, do they really have influence? Because it looks like they don't, considering this article that we're reading right now. U.S. and foreign chip makers have resisted U.S. efforts to limit their business with China because obviously, and you're seeing this a lot now, United States is saying, well, if you're working with China, you're not allowed to use American parts in your products. And these other countries are saying, well, actually, we'll just make products without American parts if we're not allowed to use American parts, because having access to the Chinese market and Chinese technology, Chinese manufacturing is so important that we would rather go without American stuff versus going without Chinese stuff. And it's just a complete embarrassment that the United States is just on the back foot, is just retreating, completely losing on absolutely every front possible. Okay, so the most vocal criticism has come from South Korea. China is by far its largest export market. So a close U.S. military and economic ally is also careful not to anger Beijing, which has strong influence over North Korea. So again, South Korean leadership, I have to applaud them because they're doing things that are in the best interest of their people versus doing things that are detrimental to their people and of benefit to the United States. I just, again, do not understand places like Japan and Germany that do things that are detrimental to their own people. U.S. officials in recent weeks said the U.S. doesn't seek to decouple from China. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in an April speech that Washington's strategy is to limit restrictions to highly strategic technologies with a small yard, high fence. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said in multiple speeches, a full separation from China's economy will be disastrous for both countries. Okay, so this entire paragraph is just the United States realizing that it doesn't really have the leverage it thought it did, and so the backtracking on the decoupling talk. And now they're saying they're going to have limit restrictions to highly strategic technologies with a small yard, high fence. Well, guess what? China has access to a lot of rare earth materials, metals, etc., that are necessary for creating high technology, advanced technology. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to limit things that are beneficial for the advancement of their country, they will do the exact same thing right back to you. And if China doesn't have a complete monopoly on some of these various natural resources, then the only other country that usually has it is places like Russia. And so you're really screwing yourself over here, America, by doing what you're doing, because China and Russia can retaliate to a far larger extent than you can. They have more mechanisms for punishing you than you have mechanisms for punishing them. Okay, let's see what else they say. Others in Washington, particularly Republican lawmakers, want tougher stances on China. So this is that wonderful thing where the uniparty, the duopoly, whatever you want to call it, is just fomenting wars. And the two parties, the Democratic and Republican parties, are just fomenting different wars. So Republicans want war with China, and they want peace with Russia. Democrats want peace with China and war with Russia. So they just swap who they want war with. And it's completely obvious at face value that no matter who you choose, the United States is going to be at war. It's just about which war comes first, which war goes on the longest, which war, et cetera, et cetera. And you're not actually the person that gets to make those decisions. It's someone behind the scenes that's picking and choosing, like, we need a Republican now because we need to go to war with China, or we need a Democrat now because we need to cause more suffering in Russia. So yeah, we can just skip this part pretty much. Let's just read the ending. Strengthen the U.S. controls over technology exports, blah, blah, blah. Companies are hard at work to weaken and circumvent the rules, export controls. All right, so that's an interesting sentence. I mean, if they're looking to weaken and circumvent the rules, that's because of the fact that they would rather work with China instead of the United States. You can't control technology when two huge firms get to do whatever they want. Conservative think tank, blah, blah, blah. You look very weak, blah, blah, blah. Samsung, for one, has said it has curtailed some of its operations. It only produces memory chips in China that don't require the most advanced technology, which she said was a business decision unrelated to geopolitical concerns. Okay, well, so even when they're making decisions that are beneficial to America, they're like, actually, we're not doing this because you told us to. We're just doing this because it makes good business sense. So that's kind of an embarrassment to the United States, too. U.S. is also pressuring Asian manufacturers to curb their operations in China through the $53 billion CHIPS and Science Act, while wooing Samsung and TSMC with the program's incentives to build plants in the U.S. Washington has laid out expectations that such money would be awarded in exchange for companies limiting investments in China, blah, blah, blah. So both these companies, chip makers, have resisted such efforts. So America just has no political capital. That's really what you should get from this article is, I mean, if you haven't realized yet, America is losing. They're losing, they're declining. And I've had boomers tell me, like, well, the 1970s or whatever, 1980s were really tough too. So we've been through this before and we'll bounce back again. And you don't realize the circumstances are wildly different. There's a peer competitor, whereas the Soviet Union was never truly a peer competitor. The peer competitor now is obviously China, and Russia is working with them again. The only reason the United States really won the Cold War was because of pitting China and the Soviet Union against each other, which they're now closer than ever. And so then you have all these other third countries that really hate America now. And 30, 40, 50 years ago, they didn't actually hate America back then. And so there's a variety of factors that tell me that America is not going to bounce back from this. This is not like the 70s and 80s. So boomers, please feel free to be angry in my comment section. I love just mocking you and teasing you. But yeah, this world you created, it's declining. And as you can see from the smile on my face, I couldn't be happier about it. So let's just wrap up this article. The South Korean government and companies have asked the U.S. to reconsider these restrictions. Industry executives say some Korean companies are so troubled that they are considering forgoing U.S. federal government aid, a move that could deal a blow to one of the administration's signature programs. So just more embarrassment across every front. The United States just cannot get any wins right now. Whether we're talking about Latin America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Oceania, however you pronounce that garbage continent. United States just can't win. It's on the back foot. If Russia isn't defeating it in one area, one theater of this war, then China is defeating it in another. And if America is really unlucky, both Russia and China are defeating the United States simultaneously in a certain domain, in a certain area. So just absolutely, absolutely embarrassing. America had to be so mismanaged, given all the advantages it had, that we're at this point. Like there are so many things that America could have done to stay at least on top of the world for another 30 years or so. The fact that they're losing this quickly is due to peak incompetence, peak nepotism that allowed these people to get into positions of power. And if they're watching, they should be absolutely ashamed themselves and embarrassed. If you're watching, you should be really upset that this happened, especially if you're from a Western nation. But most of you, if you're watching this, you already realize how unfortunate the decline of the West is and what an abomination it is compared to what it used to be. So anyways, that's the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you actually liked it, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps me in the algorithm. And if you want to hear more content from me, we're constantly creating new content. We're constantly innovating, constantly advancing things. And so please subscribe to our channel for all the latest commentary analysis of contemporary issues. We're going to be expanding into other science and technology, talking more about psychology if you're interested in any of those topics. We're really expanding into, and I guess I should just get into this. This channel, it's all about contemporary issues. That's what I'm doing. Whether it's governments, businesses, the latest in understanding human dynamics, interactions, interpersonal, intrapersonal things. Anything that's contemporary that might be of interest to the average person, that's what this channel is about. And we're starting off with geopolitics just because of the fact that this is such an important area in modern society. But we're going to expand into a ton of things. So please subscribe to this channel if you're interested in any of that stuff, because we're going to have a ton of really interesting content coming up. So thank you for sticking with me throughout this video, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.